All right, guys. So today we're going to be talking about colonization and indigenous people. Remember, this is we've already talked about this before. We talked about how the Europeans came over and what had happened to the indigenous people of that area. The Spanish invaders of South and Central America had little respect for the indigenous people who owned the land. Remember, we had the encomienda system where the white Spaniards believed that they were superior mainly, basically because of the color of their skin and where they were born. So, if you were an indigenous person, you were at the very bottom of this social pyramid. You had no land. You were enslaved. You were basically not even considered human. So, they did not respect these people, and they did not respect the land. The Spanish attempted to, and in some cases were able to destroy indigenous culture, the way they lived, what they believed in, architecture, which means buildings, how they had their structure set up, and history. They forced indigenous people to convert and to give up their own beliefs and instead practice Christianity. The Spanish forced indigenous people to speak Spanish. So remember, the indigenous people were polytheistic. The word polytheistic again means that they believed in multiple gods. So now the Spaniards were forcing these people to believe in just one God, to convert into Christianity. A lot of the times they were forced to practice Christianity by force. If they did not convert it, they did not believe in Christianity, many times they would be killed. Also, they forced the indigenous people to stop speaking their own language and start speaking Spanish. So they lost a lot of their culture, a lot of their architecture, a lot of their history. In general, the Spaniards were cruel and incredibly violent towards the indigenous people. They forced them into slavery, tortured them, and committed genocide. This is a vocabulary word, so make sure that you have this on your index card. The word genocide means to kill a particular group of people just because they belong to this group. So, an example would be the genocide of World War II, where Hitler killed the Jewish people just because they belonged to this particular group. The Spaniards and other Europeans unknowingly brought over many deadly diseases that the indigenous people had no resistance to. So they did not have any protection against smallpox, the flu, which is called influenza. This devastating effect of these diseases was that many native communities were left with so few survivors that they could no longer fight off the Spanish. So a lot of these indigenous groups, a lot of these tribes, the people there got very sick and died, and there wasn't enough people to fight them, so they were not able to fight off the Spaniards, so they would conquer that area. Unlike the British invasion, the colonization of now called the United States, in Spanish colonized regions, intermarriage was accepted, meaning that they could marry people of different races. So again, this meant that racially new groups emerged over time. People who had a heritage of European and indigenous were called mestizos. Today, Latin America is considered mestizo and have assimilated to Western culture. So, in the United States, if you were indigenous, you were not allowed to marry a white European. This was completely against what they believed in. But in Mexico or in Central and South America, it was legal. It was normal for a white European to marry an indigenous person. The children that they would have would be called the mestizos. So this was considered okay. It wasn't considered illegal, or it wasn't taboo. It wasn't wrong at this time period. All right, as you have learned, many indigenous communities have endured in Central and South America, but their rights are often ignored or abused in today's Western dominant society. So even though these people have been able to survive hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of abuse and neglect, being forced into slavery, being tortured, forced to assimilate, forced to change, even today these people are still not being treated fairly. Remember, indigenous people or native Indians are still not likely to have access to healthcare, do not have access to education, and they most likely live in poverty. So this is something to keep in mind. So this concludes today's lesson. If you have any questions, guys, feel free to text me or call me in at Moto. Remember, you only have one vocabulary word today, and the word is genocide. So make sure you have it for tomorrow's class. All right, guys. See you later.